After an unplanned hiatus, welcome back to the tiny room. I am your no longer sick co-host Michael, and I am joined digitally by my picture of health co-host Benjamin. Say hello, Benjamin.
We both know that was a facetious description of me, Michael. I'm a little under the weather today, a little nasally around the edges
as well. To be honest.
Yeah, there's a lot of mucus.
There might be the occasional sniffle in this podcast. Ben,
Yep.
I was suffering from Australian fever.
Australian fever, is that where
Yes.
you can't help but listen to Kylie Minogue?
Yes, you see, you might have misunderstood and thought I meant Australian flu, which is the prevailing flu that's going around Ireland at the moment. But that's not what's happened. I have just become obsessed with all things Australia.
Yeah, would one say that you just can't get it out of your head?
I can't get it out of my head. Prawns are all I think about.
Yeah, okay.
Prawns, because prawns are what they call them in Australia, not shrimp.
It's not shrimps. What
No.
about tell me there's a Barbie? Tell me there's a Barbie.
Well, there is a Barbie. Ben, did you know that the famous Australian phrase, throw another shrimp on the Barbie, doesn't make sense in Australia because they throw prawns on the Barbie.
They throw prawns on the Barbie.
But that was an ad from the 80s starring Crocodile Dundee actor, forget his name,
Paul Hogan.
Paul Hogan. And they had to say throw a shrimp on the Barbie because Americans wouldn't understand what a prawn was doing on a Barbie.
Because they went and called everything a shrimp. Because if it
Yeah.
ain't shrimp, it ain't American.
Exactly.
If it ain't American,
Anyway,
it ain't worth squat.
is there any news, Ben?
Yes. There
What
is
is the news? Go on.
Well, there's a number of different things. Since we were talking about the 80s, it's quite interesting that you brought this up.
That's your
There are
opinion.
new images. There are new images that have surfaced from Captain Marvel, which is going to be set in the 80s before the MCU timeline took place, or earlier in the MCU timeline, perhaps. But it's
So eloquent, Ben.
Yeah, sorry, I've got all the words. Brie Larson has been seen in her costume.
Brie Larson,
Captain
who is
Marvel.
famously named after a cheese.
And a Swedish author who passed away before giving us, not before giving us a wonderful series of crime novels.
Oh, the Dragon Tattoo Man.
Yes, Stieg Larsson, which is quite
Ben-
close.
Yeah, maybe Stieg is a cheese. Ben, what did you think of the costume?
It seems to me that the costume is heavily based on the Ultimate Universe Captain
It's
Marvel.
a funny colour, isn't it?
It's a funny color because
What's
traditionally,
going on
Michael,
there?
the Marvel costume,
Mm-hmm.
the Captain Marvel costume, is red and black with a gold star. Whereas this one was decidedly
Well,
emerald.
you say traditionally, but that costume that she currently wears and the costume that looks like it's going to be in the movie, that's only been around for 5 or 6 years. Before that, she used to have a kind of black leotard thing.
Oh, okay. So they're going with
Black
they're going with the new iteration. Oh yeah,
Yeah,
Sorry, go on.
No, it's considerably less sexist, to be honest.
Yeah, no, that's not a bad thing. I'm not knocking it for that reason. I'm just surprised that they went with green. I didn't know that
think-
green was a thing.
Because the green is generally the colour of the Kree uniforms.
Yeah, true. It's true.
So I'd say there's one of two things happening. Either A, this is when she has stolen a Kree uniform, and later on she's going to get a more modern coloured version.
Ooh.
Or they're going to colour correct it in post. They're going to fix it in post.
Gonna fix it in post.
Yeah.
Like how you fix me and all my racist rants.
Yeah. You don't really have racist rants. You just unintentionally say something very racist about once a week.
Yeah, well, you say unintentional. I say potato. No, I'm just kidding. I'm not a racist. I hope.
Is there any
Anyway.
other news, Ben?
Yeah. I'm going to make it political, Michael. I'm sorry.
Oh no.
Do you keep up with current events in that America?
Not really, Ben. You see, I have a whole thing about Irish people who keep too much abreast of American politics and yet couldn't tell you their local TD.
Yeah, well, it's
something
quite
like
insulting.
it gets my goat. Someone who could tell you who the vice chancellor of the second House of Representatives in America is, but doesn't know which party controls their local area in their own country kind of
Probably
bothers
Fine
me.
Gael. Yeah, that's fair. That's that's pretty fair.
Sorry, I'm getting a bit pointy here with my pen.
That's okay. I'll take the points. I'll
Go on
to that. It rather more draws the ire of current events in America are not really something that I'm all that interested in for today's podcast, but it is of great interest to international watchdogs that pay attention to a certain clock. I'm referring to the Doomsday Clock, which
the actual Doomsday Clock or the comic book, The Doomsday Clock?
Well, it's very interesting because these things have a knock-on effect, Michael. The actual Doomsday Clock, which is a clock that shows how close or how possible nuclear war might be. And currently, the Doomsday Clock rests at 2 minutes to midnight, which is the closest. Once it hits midnight, we go kaboom. That is the closest it's been to midnight since the Cold War. So it's a rather interesting time to be alive. In response to this,
yes,
DC Comics published a rather insulting tweet.
Good.
At the moment, DC is running an event called the Doomsday Clock, or the Doomsday Countdown. I can't remember, which is tying in their Watchmen. And what they published in response to the news that we are the closest to nuclear war that we have been since the 1980s was a tweet that said, "To take your mind off the real Doomsday Clock, pick up a copy of our Doomsday Clock."
Fair enough.
But everybody in
just
America...
good marketing.
Everyone in America lost their minds. And they were like, how can you make light of this catastrophic event? And I found it quite funny. I found the reaction to this tweet funnier than I found the actual tweet. The actual tweet was quite funny. But I think it's hilarious that they can, give out so much about someone who tweets when their own president calls people short and fat on Twitter. But TC had to take down the tweet and issue a formal apology.
They took it down. What cowards!
They took it down and issued a formal apology
Bloody
to
DC.
anyone being hurt. So it was very, very politically correct moment in comics, which leads me to a lovely segue into other political correctness this week.
Political correctness gone mad.
Yes. So this week,
Girls Gone Wild.
Girls Gone Wild. From one tweet to another, this week, a prominent artist in Marvel was asked a question on the Twitter. John Mallon, do you know him?
Who?
John Mallon. He did that famous run of Spider-Man in the late 80s, early 90s. Clone Wars.
No, not ringing any bells.
Clone Saga, all that.
The worst Spider-Man story.
Yeah, exactly. The worst. The worst Spider-Man story ever.
Go on.
So, he was asked if... I can't remember what the exact nature of the tweet was, but somebody asked him if he felt that the gene politics of the X-Men were reminiscent of Hitler. Okay, which is a stupid question anyway. Okay, it's a bit of a silly question, and the obvious answer is no. The gene politics in the X-Men do not reflect that. And given that one of the characters is of Jewish descent and went through a concentration camp, it was probably a little bit of a silly question to ask. But what was sillier was John Mallon's response to this.
Hooray!
So I have the actual tweet here in my hand. And the tweet is, it's very incomprehensible, but here we go. X-Men are closer to Jews in SJW Hitler's Germany fighting for freedom because they see ideologues rising, silencing them, weaponizing hate, racism and socialism against the people they claim are the root of social ills. SJWs are not Nazis, but Nazis are SJWs, and X-Men aren't SJWs.
X-Men are alt-right.
I have no idea what he meant to get at. SJW stands for Social Justice Warrior, Michael.
I know, Ben.
Well, it was for the listeners, Michael. It's for the listeners. You're a well-informed man, a man of the world.
So Charles Xavier is a Milo Yiannopoulos.
Yes, I suppose. Someone who, well, according to John Mallon. Although John Mallon seems to equate them more to Jewish people. And then, most importantly about this tweet is that SJWs are not Nazis, but Nazis are SJWs, which I didn't really understand. But anyway, he seems to be comparing the current state of political correctness in the US to Nazism, which I found quite funny. So that's Marvel, excellent. Not unlike DC this week, had to step in and issue an apology on behalf of their artist.
Oh, very good.
He's been giving a stern talking to as a result of this. But I found that quite funny. Michael, I found that quite funny.
Benjamin, on the topic of mean tweets, we've had a comment on YouTube. Would you like me to read the opinions of one Johnny34? Johnny34 has commented, "What a bunch of real homos."
Is that in reference to us?
I don't know. Here's where I take this is where I take offense to it. I don't know if you can call two people a bunch. That's like, I mean, whatever about the homos thing. I've been called worse than a homosexual. That's not the worst. But two people can't be a bunch.
No, I've never bought two bananas and gone, "Oh, what a great bunch of bananas."
No,
it's never happened.
It's a pair of bananas.
It's never happened. I would return that bunch if there were only two in it. What video was this on? This is all news to me.
I don't know. I can't remember. It just made me laugh. Something about how pop culture can influence real communities.
Why is that? What was so homosexual about that episode?
Ben, I don't know. Doesn't matter. Who cares about the homosexual thing? That's fine. It's just two people can't be a bunch.
Well, hang on. If this guy's just wandering around miscategorizing, collective nouns, what are we to do, Michael?
We have to make a big deal of it on a podcast, which he obviously listens to.
Well,
so Ben,
for future reference, Johnny24, we are a pair of homos.
Yeah.
Not a bunch.
Well, hold on a minute. No, I'm actually not a homosexual. Again, not that would be a problem. But
you just keep digging.
Dig up, boy, dig up. Anyway, Ben.
Yeah.
Speaking of villains, let's smoothly segue into our topic for the week.
Hang on, we can't. No, hang on. We have to go back. You just finished saying homosexuals, and then you said, "Speaking of villains."
No, Johnny34 is the villain.
We need clarification on that, by the way. Yeah, okay. We meant Johnny34 as a villain, not the homosexual community at large.
Ben, if I'm taking offense at Johnny34 describing two people as a bunch of homos, does that make me a grammar Nazi or a grammar social justice warrior?
It certainly doesn't make you an X-Man.
Yeah. Anyway, let's talk about villains. Ben,
okay.
The movie event, the comic book and movie event of the year will undoubtedly be Infinity War.
Yes.
You can agree or disagree with these statements. And Thanos is the villain of the Infinity War. And the Russo brothers, who are directing the movie, have said in a lot of ways, it is Thanos' movie.
Oh.
So it's hard to do a villain right.
So it's tough.
The big thing of this year is going to be, is Thanos going to be interesting?
Oh, that's such a difficult question, Michael.
Oh.
Well, he's got a big villain no going for him already.
A big chin.
No, he's not British. He's not.
Oh,
British.
the villains have to be British, or is this just an Irish thing?
British and sophisticated is generally how I like my villains, and he's decidedly not.
Throw some sophisticated British villains at me.
No, I'm stuck. No, damn it.
Hela Hela from Thor.
Hela's Australian, but she's very British in
Oh, she is
in
Australian.
She's
You'd
Australian.
think I would know that with my Australian fever.
Yeah, she's awfully British in pronunciation, though. So we'll give her an L pass. We'll throw that on. Loki.
Hans Gruber. Is Hans Gruber British?
He's German in the movie, but he's a British actor.
So it's British people being other races that's evil.
I think so. Tom Hiddleston, he's very British.
He's the Britishest man alive.
He's Loki. Loki's now a Britishman.
Well, you could argue whether Loki's a villain or not, but that's probably for a little bit later on in the podcast.
Here we go. The roller coaster of whether or not. Ultron was played with a British accent.
Was that a British accent or just a James Spader voice?
It was James Spader voice, but it was heavily influenced, no?
Yeah, he's just kind of posh, isn't he? He's kind of posh American, the way posh Americans sound British.
Yeah, I suppose. Yeah. That's true.
Hard to argue with that. Ben.
Yes.
Tell us about why, as a culture, we are so obsessed with villains.
Well,
there for a second. Tell us about that topic.
I think it's a long-held kind of theory. First of all, that villains are easier to write. You can always
easier to write.
I think now this depends on how you look at your villains. You have two types.
I look
of
at them
villains.
like this.
If the viewers could see, he's kind of stretched his face.
Yeah, I've done a visual gag, but on a podcast.
Visual gag, but on a podcast, so it doesn't really carry. But there are two types of villains. There are well-rounded, human villains, and there are paper cutout villains. They're called cardboard villains or paper cut villains. And it's easier to write a villain because it's easier to kind of give them more interesting action points or more interesting plots. What that means is it's easier to write action for a villain than it is to write action for a hero.
Or you could just give them a big mustache.
Or you can just give them a big mustache and a British accent. But, usually I find people give it a little more effort than that. Not always. Not always. But some of the time. But what for whatever reason, the great villains seem to stick in the mind of viewers an awful lot more than the heroes. Darth Vader, for example. Of course. Heath Ledger Joker, for example.
Yeah, keep going.
Oh, have I got any more? I might be all out.
That's it.
Yeah, that's it. They're the two I've got. I'm all out. Would you have any more?
Hannibal Lecter.
Hannibal Lecter. They made a whole series about him.
Yeah.
They made a whole series about him. So I think we have to look at those key figures and try and figure out why they're so popular if we're going to do this podcast episode. And luckily, Michael,
yes,
I've done just that.
Oh, you've done some research.
Well, once upon a time, Michael, I wrote a blog, as you know. That's how we ended up doing a podcast together.
Yeah.
But one of the things that I wrote about in my blog was about a character called the Sovereign in an Adult Swim cartoon called The Venture Bros.
That's very interesting, Ben. Total coincidence here. I was going to talk about another character called Sovereign.
Oh, okay.
But not the same guy, but another guy with the same name. Which is, I thought you'd kind of stood on my toes there. I thought you'd spent my load.
No, I won't be spending any loads.
Don't spend my load on me, Ben.
That's fair enough. No, the Sovereign was a very interesting character that was introduced in The Venture Bros. Have you ever seen The Venture Bros?
I have. I'm acquainted with it, but I haven't watched it.
Okay. Well, to those that aren't acquainted with it, it's a pastiche of all the old Hanna-Barbera cartoons like Johnny Quest and the Hardy Boys and things like that. And it makes fun of that kind of American adventure cartoon genre.
From the 70s and 80s.
From the 70s, 80s, and 60s as well, I think. But yeah, it takes the mick out of all that. And one of the most interesting characters on it was the Sovereign. And he was a man who ran the League of Calamitous Intent, which was...
LCI.
Which was...
Language Centre of Ireland.
Oh, God. Are you equating the Language Centre of Ireland to the League of Calamitous Intent? Are you saying that it's a bunch of villains run by a David Bowie shapeshifter?
Yes. It's
Yes.
defunct now, though, so
Wonderful.
I wouldn't worry about it.
Oh, damn. Well, anyway, outside
Yes.
of all that,
Yes.
when I did this, I looked at 3 things that the philosopher Aristotle put down for great drama. Yeah, this one gets a bit nerdy.
Ben, just as a forewarning to you and the listeners,
Yes.
every time you say Aristotle, I'm going to go.
I can call him a dog if that stops that from happening.
No, that's worse. That's much worse.
That's worse. Okay, Aristotle it is. Yep, absolutely. So he outlined 3 key elements, what he calls modes of persuasion, when you're writing fiction or when you're writing a drama.
I hate learning things.
I know, it's awful. Those 3 elements are pathos, ethos,
yes,
and logos.
Lagos. The
Lagos,
island of Lagos.
no, it's not the island of Lagos. You don't have to set all your dramas on Lagos. It's not a problem. Is it not Lagos? Is that not what we? Is that how you say that
Ben,
one?
Anyway,
Anyway.
you do the book learning, and I do the being slightly disruptive. That's how.
So look,
that's the dynamic we've got here.
Fair enough. So the 3 that you have there, the key one that usually makes
Porthos,
any character.
Athos. What did you say? Porthos, Athos, and D'Artagnan.
Yes, that was it. All from Alexandre Dumas' 3 Musketeers. No, I'm kidding. I can keep up. I can do this all day. So the 3 of these are really important, but the most important one is pathos. Pathos is, he defined it in his work Rhetoric as awakening emotion in the audience so as to induce them to make the judgment desired. What that means is, if you simplify it, is that you have to make characters
for the listeners, Ben, not for me, because I
not for you, because you understand perfectly. But
I'm a very intelligent person.
For
but
listeners,
if listeners don't understand, tell them. I'm not even going to listen.
So it's really important to make
Go
your
on.
characters relatable with experience or similar emotions that the audience might have felt at various times. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
So a great example of this, villain-wise, is Walter White. The first season of Breaking Bad puts Walter White through a series of things that most Americans would understand. Financial trouble, failing marriage, difficulty
Health
raising
problems,
a disabled child, health problems, and more
male
importantly,
pattern balding,
and more importantly, work stress from his job as a science teacher. So when we have this, what happens is the audience automatically engages with that person. You'll find generally that pathos is the key to any great character, not alone villains. However, the other 2 are just as important.
Go on.
Ethos and logos were stated that Aristotle said that if you really want to make a drama that suits or a character that really connects with an audience, you have to use all 3. Ethos is defined as persuasion through convincing listeners of one's moral character. Okay, this means that your character has to be shown to be like a person of principle, not necessarily good moral character, but of moral character in general. So they have to have a series of principles. And generally speaking, you can distinguish a villain from a cardboard villain to a genuine villain based on their principles. Okay?
Right.
If they don't have principles, they're a cardboard villain. You don't really understand why they do what they do. They're just a bit of a dick. Okay?
Like for example, the Joker, who wanted to see the world burn.
Well, theoretically, he has a principle.
No, I'm saying
principle,
that's his principle.
Yeah, exactly. That's his principle. So you can get behind and understand the motivation of why that character does what they do.
Or how Michael Keaton's the Vulture from Spider-Man Homecoming wants to keep his crew working and feed his family.
Yeah, exactly. He's got working class motivations, so he does that. Exactly. And the moral character doesn't necessarily have to be...
Or like how Hela wants to stick it to her dad.
Yeah, so again, that would probably be pushing a little more in direction of a cardboard cutout. Because everything that she does is not really clearly defined. She's the goddess of death, but we don't really understand why she's driven to do these things. It doesn't really matter. A good example for Thanos, one that's about to come out, is that he says bringing order to the universe is rarely an occasion for, or rarely allows fun, or something like that. That's the line he uses, isn't it? Bring order to the universe.
You flubbed that a bit, but
I flubbed it a bit. But So you understand that he has a principle. He's bringing order to what he sees as chaos. So that might give us hope for him. And the final one that you need to make all of this possible is logos. Yeah. And logos is probably the
like
key
the
one.
Nike tick.
Like the Nike tick, like a logo. No, that's
like the Apple symbol.
Like the Apple symbol.
Yeah, logos. I thought we needed logos.
Okay. So, to give a definition of what, yes.
But I went to university, just in case anyone forgets.
No.
I'm pretending to be stupid.
Michael plays the ordinary man to my silly man. And he voices what other people might do. I'm sure people have stopped listening by now, but if they haven't, they've definitely stopped listening to me by now. But the last one is logos.
I stopped listening when Ben wouldn't stop going on about logos. What makes a good logo? What makes a bad logo? Do you have to wear your logo on your belt like the X-Men?
So I'll give you the last definition for logos, which is something more refined than the capacity to make private feelings public. It enables the human being to perform as no other animal can. It makes it possible for him to perceive and make clear to others, through reasoned discourse, the difference between what is advantageous and what is harmful, between what is just and what is unjust, and between what is good and what is evil. So basically, that means that it focuses on... Yes?
What the fuck does that mean?
Yeah, Aristotle focuses on intelligence and reason to separate human beings from basic actions. So generally speaking, when we want our characters to be perfectly rounded, they have to show some degree of intelligence, some degree of moral character, and some degree of relatability. So generally speaking, you'll find that with villains. A great example of someone who shows all three of these is... Silva from Skyfall, which is a bit of an outdated example, but do you remember Skyfall?
Skyfall.
Yeah. So
then for me, Skyfall was practically yesterday.
Yeah.
I know you're younger, but I mean, how old is it? 7 years old? It's like yesterday.
If even. Yeah. So Silva was a really good example of all three of those things coming together. Because
coming.
Okay, fair enough. But he was betrayed, so that's his relatable feeling. He was let down by his mother figure, in that case, Judi Dench. Right. He has a very clear goal and a very clear motivation to why he's doing that. Oh my God, is that a GoBot?
No, it's Grimlock. It doesn't matter. Keep going.
Okay, and then finally, he's wickedly intelligent, and when villains use logos in the right way, they make the heroes question their own decisions. That's what they do.
Like Michael Keaton's Vulture.
Like Michael Keaton's Vulture, exactly. You're not really sure if beating that guy up for stealing parts that the government is just disposing of anyway is such a bad thing. But
that the government caused themselves anyway.
That the government's caused themselves anyway. So you have to look at things like this and try to understand. And when the three of them come together, we have fantastic things. I think one of the best things that people do for the betrayal dynamic in villains is they use the ethos one quite well. So when you build up a character to have a very strong moral background, in this particular case like a good moral background, and then you have the sudden and inevitable betrayal of that, it stings an awful lot. A great example of that is Quaid in Total Recall.
Hold on a second. Quaid!
Yeah, exactly. So you spend the whole movie rooting for Arnold Schwarzenegger, because he's this guy who's lost his memory and he's trying to make his way back. And throughout the entire movie, he shows himself to be a person of good moral character. He helps people and does things. And so it hurts all the more when you realize, oh no, he's been working for the Federation the whole time.
It turns out he was Hauser the whole time.
He was Hauser the whole time. And that's crazy.
Quaid.
And it kind of hurts the thing. Whereas, if you use a more
Release
recent
the
example,
oxygen, Quaid.
Whereas,
or something. It's been a while since I've seen Total Recall, to be honest.
If you look at a more recent example of betrayal, for example, Thor Ragnarok, every time Loki fucks Thor over, you kind of look at it and go, meh, saw it coming.
Yeah, you see, the whole thing, I'd argue against Loki being a villain, to be honest, anymore. Okay. He has kind of fallen into that trap the trap of writers and fans falling so deeply in love with their villain that they have to keep them around.
Yeah.
And when you have to keep them around, it's very hard to have them keep being a bad egg because eventually they're going to do something that's kind of irredeemable. So, you know the old expression, Ben, you either die a hero or live long enough to become a villain.
That you came up with that, didn't you, Michael?
I don't think that was me. I think that was Aristotle who said that originally.
I don't.
I believe it was Pythagoras. He said the square of the hypotenuse is equal to the sum of the chance of seeing yourself becoming a villain.
That's not even no.
That's not even funny. Ben, shut up for a second. Hold on. But in the real world, they say that about the real world, but in comic books, it's very much the opposite. Any villain who has enough staying power eventually becomes a hero. I've made a little list. Loki.
Yep.
Venom.
Yep.
Catwoman.
Yes.
Yes. The Terminator.
Yes.
To a certain extent, the Predator.
Yeah. Alien versus Predator is kind of the hero in that.
Hannibal Lecter to some degree.
Yeah, what's that about? That's a weird...
I know, it's weird.
It's a weird
Buffy.
Transference.
No, Buffy
Vampire
was
Slayer.
I think Spike from Buffy the Vampire Slayer.
Yeah, Spike did the whole transition.
A little bit of Faith as well, although Faith was a bit of a switcheroo because she was introduced as a hero, became a villain, then became a hero again.
For Christ's sake.
Bloody ridiculous.
Redemption arc.
Yeah, like it just keeps happening that if you stick around long enough, basically you become the hero. Doctor Doom is currently
a hero,
kind of in the middle of a hero turn as well.
Carnage even.
Again. Yeah, and he wears a white suit, and Carnage was good there for a while. He's bad again now, I think. But that's what I'm saying. In a lot of ways, you declaw your villain when they're around too much and people love them so much.
Yeah, I always hated that effect when a villain is very powerful as a villain, and they're like really strong, and they eventually come over to the good side, and for some reason
Magneto.
They're not nearly as strong then as they are as a villain. Like they seem like such an insurmountable obstacle when they're a bad guy, and then all of a sudden every other villain can kick them around a little bit.
Juggernaut.
I never understood that.
The other thing that's interesting, relating back to what you said about your pathos, is this whole thing about having a relatable villain, making it. Is that what the pathos one was?
Yes. Relatability.
Yeah, having some sort of relatability. In a lot of ways, people can go too far in that. Darth Vader being the classic example. Original Darth Vader, we knew next to nothing about, and he was amazing.
Yeah, he was real scary.
He was real scary. He's real intimidating. He just appears on the screen, and you go, "Oh shit! There's the bad guy. Look at him in his spooky samurai helmet. He's gonna be a bad egg." But then. Bad egg. The sequels seem to be a 6-hour effort. Sorry, the prequels seem to be a 6-hour effort to ruin Darth Vader by making him relatable.
Yeah, but they just picked the worst possible way of doing that.
What would Aristotle say about that, Ben? What would he say if he wasn't dead?
Well, to be fair, in defense of Aristotle,
Ben's going to defend Aristotle on a podcast.
He didn't necessarily apply it directly to villains. He just applied it to characters that he felt were more important.
What an asshole!
What a tosser! What a bunch of tossers! Oh no, I said that wrong. See how I got that wrong?
Because it's two.
Because it's not. Yeah, okay, fair enough. No, I think there's definitely an element of that. If you want a big bad villain, then you can't give that much away. I think it follows a similar principle of once you see the monster in a horror movie, it's not nearly as scary as what it was in the build-up.
Yeah, often. What about, Ben? What about bad guys who aren't really, in any sense, a character?
As in
just a kind of presence, an evil, terrifying, unstoppable presence. For example, the Terminator in the original movie, the first movie.
Yeah.
I mean, he doesn't have it. You don't relate to him. You don't care about his backstory. His backstory is irrelevant. He's just a big, scary Austrian trying to shoot that woman.
Yeah, okay. So, I think, yeah, okay, I completely agree with you there. And I think another interesting parallel for that is Anton Chigurh from No Country for Old Men.
Yeah.
Have you
There's a
right
few
there?
of them. Michael Myers would kind of fall
Yeah.
into that same category. Or the T-1000, the Terminator's Terminator.
Sure. Oh, yeah. That was, yeah. I think in that case, you kind of said it yourself. They're not necessarily characters. They're more of a plot device in that regard, or a theme. You know what I mean?
But still great villains.
Still great villains, yeah. I don't know, it's hard. Any theories on
Terrible
that?
characters, great villains.
Yeah, terrible characters, great villains. Okay, so it surpasses in some ways then.
I'm saying that a villain doesn't necessarily have to be a great character to grip you as
Yeah.
an iconic villain.
Yeah.
Now, I don't think that applies to Thanos, because Thanos is definitely being sold to us as a character. He's not
Yeah.
just a terrifying force of nature that shows up and is unstoppable.
No,
His Black Order may be something along those lines.
Is the Black Order definitely still happening?
Oh yeah, I mean
Okay.
Nidge from
Yeah.
from yeah.
Love hate.
Gonna give me those Infinity Stones, yeah. Gonna
Alright.
fucking Nidge.
You will give me those Infinity Stones now, or I will personally spray paint your face with acid. Classic.
Space
Classic
acid.
Midge. Space acid. Space acid.
So Ben, let me tell you a couple of my. Let me tell you about one of the villains that I like,
Do tell.
because
Do
this
tell.
this doesn't fall into your thing, I don't think. But
Good.
let's see what you think. Have you ever? I know you don't really have opposable thumbs, so you're not massively into video games,
I am Park Cat.
or kind of holding things is also a bit of a challenge.
Yeah.
But anyway, Mass Effect video game.
Yes. Never played it.
Never heard of it. Doesn't matter. It's a
I know
PC,
it.
PC. It's from BioWare.
Ooh.
It's an action role playing game. BioWare, in case you don't know, which you probably don't, were mostly famous for Star Wars games.
Okay.
And Mass Effect very clearly comes from a lineage of Star Wars games. It's set in space. It's in the future. There's lots of different alien species and a kind of alliance of different alien species. And
Okay.
there's a kind of power like the Force called biotics, and it's basically space telekinesis and so on and so on. But it's technology based rather than magic based.
Okay. I can get behind that a little bit more.
Think of a kind of more technology-ish, kind of Star Warsy-ish universe. It's a
No
great universe,
midichlorians.
actually. No midichlorians, no. There's different chemicals. Anyway, in the first game, you're introduced to the villain. His name is Saren,
Okay.
and he's kind of like a rogue space. They're called specters, but the best way to think about it is like a future space Navy SEAL.
Ooh.
The kind of the elite of the elite, but with a bit more of an adventurer thrown in as well. Kind of like how the world imagines Navy SEALs are.
Yeah. Okay.
So he's a
cool, though.
future space Navy SEAL, and he's gone off the reservation and he's attacking planets for some reason.
Okay.
And he has this huge 2-kilometer long battleship called Sovereign.
Ooh.
And the great mystery is, where did he get this ship that's letting him be so powerful and so influential?
Okay.
And partway through the game, you actually discover that Sovereign isn't his ship. Sovereign is a 2-kilometer long alien called a Reaper.
Oh.
And these Reapers are artificial intelligence aliens who live outside the galaxy. They live in the empty space between galaxies.
Oh.
And Sovereign is the vanguard of the Reaper invasion. Every 50,000 years, the Reapers attack the galaxy and harvest all living organisms.
Oh.
And Sovereign was left behind to monitor the galaxy while the other Reapers go back out to hibernate.
Oh.
And Saren, it turns out, discovered the ship,
yes.
and he has been indoctrinated. Sovereign, all Reapers, but Sovereign is the one in the game, if you spend time in or around them,
Yes.
they gradually and very insidiously control your mind. So that you think you're working to stop them, but in fact you're doing everything they need you to do to bring them back.
That's pretty clever.
So the great thing about Sovereign as a bad guy is you can't just go and bloody punch a 2 kilometer long spaceship.
Yeah, it doesn't work very well.
No. So, I mean, Saren is his kind of his avatar that you can fist fight. You can Captain Kirk him and hit him with a double broom handle punch attack. But Sovereign is just there. It takes, spoilers for the end of the game, it takes the entire fleet of hundreds of ships and basically a lucky shot to kill Sovereign.
Okay.
So he does die in the end. But then you find out that he was only the Vanguard. And a species of these things are waiting out in deep space to come in and take over. Brilliant. Amazing villain. There's a twist where he turns out to be, where just this kind of cool ship turned out to be actually alive and the driving force of the thing. But also, like, unfightable.
Yeah.
Terrifying. Like, you can't reason with him because he exists on a time scale beyond
what you could comprehend.
He's millions of years old, and this is just one cycle.
You do know this is just your favorite theme in space. It's cosmic horror in space.
Yeah, cosmic horror in space is the best. Yeah,
it's your favorite thing. I think you have a fair point, though.
It's very Lovecraftian. I'm aware of that. He looks like a giant squid, a giant tentacly monster thing.
Okay.
Imagine a giant 2 kilometer long squid spaceship, and then you've got Sovereign.
Do you not think that Saren is what embodies all those elements of Aristotle?
Woo!
Do you
Saren or Sovereign? The guy who gets mind control?
Sovereign. Sovereign is
the mind controller or the mind controllee?
Mind controllee. So I'm saying if you look at so the villain, obviously the main villain of this game that you were talking about is Sovereign. Yeah.
Yeah.
And you can't really engage with a 2 kilometer long, or sorry, 13 kilometer.
2
kilometer. You can't really engage with a 2 kilometer ship. It doesn't work. But by using
you can't punch it in the face.
By using the mind controllee, you kind of enable the villain to have pathos, ethos, and logos. Because the pathos in Saren, as you've described him, is that he's just trying to save his universe. Now, he doesn't know. His ethos is very, very simple. He wants to protect the universe. And then logos is a little bit more insidious. I would say that Sovereign probably represents the logos part of things, where it's hyper intelligent and it manipulates events to look at it. But you have to look at Sovereign and Saren as like a package deal.
Mm-hmm.
And that might be what makes them so great. It's not a great explanation, but if you were looking for a nerdy kind of breakdown of why it works, the pair embody the 3 modes of persuasion as opposed to one singular character.
Well, Ben, let me tell you something. I wasn't looking for a breakdown of how it works.
Sorry.
But thanks for giving me one anyway.
Sorry. my humble apologies.
Do you have any favorite villains?
I was trying to think of favorite villains for the day. I've never gotten over Heath Ledger's Joker. Spectacular creature that he is. He's a nice subversion of what you expect. I think one of the best things about that character was the constantly shifting backstory. So
the lies, basically.
Yeah, exactly. But it really messes with that idea of pathos. Because every time you think you're going to glean an understanding into motivation or anything like that, he's clearly highly intelligent because he orchestrates these mass events and things like that. He clearly has ethos, which is his code. And the only thing you're missing and what drives the intrigue as a character is his pathos. You want to understand the relatability or the reason that he's doing these things. You want to understand the motivation of why you're doing these things. And he plays with that on the audience's part by giving you multiple interpretations. In one, he's an abused child. In another, he's a grieving husband. In another,
Traumatized soldier?
Yeah, traumatized soldier. There are all these, but even Alfred steps in to try and provide background. Do you know what I mean? Like I think the traumatized soldier was more of a fan theory.
Yeah, you're right. Actually, that's true.
He has really well. I mean, it's brought on partially by Alfred as well, because he gives you that story about his time in the jungle, where they met a warlord or a bandit who was just burning, motorcades down. He was just destroying them.
Oh yes,
he was destroying jewels. So there was a military background.
He didn't care about the jewels.
Yeah, exactly. But I think a lot of people kind of read into kind of a PTSD veteran being let down because he's highly skilled, highly trained, blah blah blah.
He knows how to use rocket launchers.
Exactly, but you're never given an exact reason, and that's what makes him so scary.
Is it about Joker or Bane that Alfred has his famous line? You were only supposed to blow the bloody doors off.
I'm afraid you've jumped not only movies or genres, but decades in that particular case. It's from the Italian Job.
Is it about Bane or Joker that he says some men want to watch the world burn, or whatever it was?
It's Joker that he says.
It is Joker. Okay.
Yeah, it's Joker that he says that about. He gets much more downplayed in The Dark Knight Rises. He's not as central a character as he should be, I think, in that film.
Alfred or Joker, because he's dead?
Alfred, because he has that. I think the most thing that people remember him for, mostly in that, is I failed you, and he has that.
Weeping, Master Wayne.
Yeah, I failed you.
He's dead. Oh no, look, there he is. He's in the cafe.
Yes,
with that woman.
With that woman. Yeah, so I think that was kind of where that one went. But I think you have a point. I think, funnily enough, when you obscure the pathos or when you take away exact reason...
Don't obscure my pathos, Ben.
Sorry. When you obscure
Did you just
the
obscure
pathos...
my pathos?
I did. I'm sorry. Are you SJWing me on our own podcast?
Yes.
Do you have a right to an unobscured pathos? Is that what you have?
Yes.
Everybody does. Do you have any more great villains?
I have a villain. Here's a villain I really like, but... I don't know. You've probably never heard of him. Ben, as you know, I enjoy a Transformer.
You do. You love an old Transformer.
There's one there. Look.
Oh, look at him. All
that's
transformed.
Bombshell, but that's not who I'm going to talk about. Ben, have you ever heard of comic book artist and writer extraordinaire Nick Roach?
No.
He's a Transformers writer. He's from Ireland. He's from Wexford.
Oh, lovely.
And he, in 2010, wrote a comic called Last Stand of the Wreckers. And Last Stand of the Wreckers defined modern Transformers comics.
Okay.
Before Nick Roach and Last Stand of the Wreckers, the voice in Transformers comics was an English writer called Simon Furman.
I see.
And he basically wrote everything ever in Transformers. But Nick Roach came along, and Nick Roach was given kind of a blank slate to write a story with some D-list Transformers. A lot of them had never appeared in comics. They'd had toys from obscure mid-90s toys, but had never appeared. And he created this story set after the end of the Transformers War, where Autobots and Decepticons are technically at peace.
Sure.
But a lunatic of a Decepticon, a bad guy, called Overlord, has taken over an Autobot prison. Okay. And this bunch of basic no-hopers, D-listers, are rounded up and sent in to try and stop Overlord.
A ragtag group of heroes.
Exactly.
Nice.
And it's not going to end well.
Ooh.
Because Overlord is one of Megatron, of course, being the leader of the Decepticons.
Yes.
But he's one of Megatron's big guns. He's what's called in Transformers a Phase Sixer. Phase 6 being a stage in an invasion. Phase 6 is a total annihilation of the local population.
I did not know.
So if you need the local population annihilated, you send in a Phase Sixer.
So he's an A-bomb.
Exactly. He's a walking weapon of mass destruction, basically.
Nice.
And the thing about Overlord is he doesn't really like that, because he sees himself as a complex person who has his own goals, and he doesn't want to be just Overlord, this planet's being a bit of a pain, go in and kill everyone.
So
he wants to be... Go on.
He's the exact opposite of Conquest from Invincible.
Yes, exactly. He is the exact opposite of that. He is that character, but he doesn't want to be just a weapon.
In terms of motivation.
So,
okay.
Exactly. So he is like physically terrifying. He's the match for hundreds of normal Transformers. He's like a Superman in a world where everyone else is kind of Captain America.
Oh, that's not good.
And you're not. Yeah, exactly. And he's a lunatic. Ooh. And he's a sadist. Ooh. And he's lavender.
He's lavender.
He's lavender and a kind of dark blue. The Transformers, sometimes they're stuck with 80s colours.
The sheer villainy.
He's got big juicy lips and
on a metal living being.
Yeah, it's great. He has the sexiest lips you've ever seen on a robot.
I'm gonna look this up. What's his
name?
You
look him up there. Overlord Nick Roach.
You keep telling me.
And the thing about Overlord is he takes over this planet and he turns it into this debauched, hellish place where he tortures the prisoners. He makes the prisoners fight in tournaments, and then if they win enough fights, they get to take part in a final challenge to escape. But then the final challenge turns out to be fighting him, and none of them have any chance against him. Every time Overlord shows up, people die in horrible, horrible ways.
Okay.
But the whole thing turns out to be he just wants Megatron to pay him attention and to see him as an equal.
Oh.
So the way to beat him, basically, is to prey on his "you're not as good as Megatron" complex.
No, he's got an inferiority. Those are some juicy-ass lips.
I'm telling you, he's the sexiest robot you've ever seen.
Good.
And again, I think I generally read him with a British accent.
He's got Luthor lips. Do you remember Justice League? The
yeah,
Justice League cartoon? Yeah. Lex Luthor has some juicy lips in that too.
So he's he like every villain, he was great when he was first introduced, and then in subsequent appearances, every time he showed up, people die. I'm saying people, I mean Transformers, but in the comics, the Transformers are people.
Yeah, but Transformers are people, sure. God, Michael, Transformers are people too. Transformer lives matter. Transformers
are people, Ben.
Yeah, my God.
Very good character. He just got a nice new toy as well.
Oh, has it been ordered? Is it headed to the tiny room?
Apparently, it's a leader class toy, Ben. That's the largest kind of mass market toy. Oh. We're talking probably $40, so €80. But apparently he's been discounted in Tesco, so I'm actually waiting this one out for him to drop down a little bit in price.
He's been discounted in Tesco's. Wonderful.
Then he can go on my shelf with my other Nick Roach Transformers.
Great. Okay.
So what do you think of that, Ben?
Well, he's kind of embodied all the things that I talked about.
Oh, for God's sake. I was trying to
stump
you.
Pathos, egos, and logos. Like his pathos is that he has an inferiority complex, which is quite relatable to a lot of people. Okay, sure, you don't suffer from such an perceived inadequacy, but there you go. His ethos is very clear. He wants to be an equal. And his logos is unquestionable. He's very intelligent. He orchestrates mass events of sadism, and not only that, but he's backed up by being fairly badass, which is the fourth mode of persuasion, badass thos, which comes a little bit later.
He's got guns. He's got guns where his nipples should be.
No way.
Yeah,
does he actually? Oh, that's excellent. I love it.
Nipple guns.
Should he be the mascot of the podcast?
Yeah, all right.
Nipple guns.
Giant bloody lavender sadist is the mascot. So he's actually not that lavender, is he? He's only his gun is lavender.
He's bluish.
He's a blue and a teal and a lavender. No, stop it.
Anyway, that's the end of the podcast, ladies and gentlemen.
Yeah. Well, it's not the end of the podcast forever, Ben.
No,
it's the end of this week's
for this
podcast.
For this week. Let us know what you think below. Do you have a favourite villain? Why is it your favourite villain? Do you think that Aristotle is a load of tosh?
Yes.
And do you think that Michael
is Aristotle a villain? Is Ben a villain?
Exactly. And more importantly, do you think that Michael and I are a bunch of homosexuals or a pair of homosexuals?
Just to reiterate, not actually a homosexual.
Jury's out on me, but
totally, totally fine. Yeah. Right, see ya.
All right, see ya. Bye.